Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, March 18th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang says he's convinced self-driving tech is already a solved problem. Gas prices spike, and used EV dealers in some markets are suddenly swamped. And Audi's Q9 SUV launches in America first, a historic shift for the German brand. Plus, Automotive News Asia editor Hans Greimel says Nissan may have dodged a bullet with its failed merger last year with Honda.
Nissan has a new CEO that did make the hard decisions, is putting Nissan through a kind of a tough love revival plan. Then meanwhile, Honda has kind of gone its own separate way.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Gasoline prices have jumped 27% in the U.S. since the Iran conflict began, and it's starting to change the global car market. Used EV dealers in Europe are seeing something they've never seen before: showrooms packed with anxious buyers. In Germany, EV-related web traffic is up 40%. Here in the U.S., not so much. Car Guru says EV searches have barely budged. Turns out, according to Cox Automotive, most American buyers won't seriously think about going electric until gas hits $6 a gallon. Meanwhile, the list of canceled EVs continues to grow. Volvo is dropping its compact EX30 electric crossover in the US, and it's not because the car was bad. One dealer told Automotive News the EX30 came out, quote, pretty bulletproof, but it only sold about 5,400 units last year, less than 5% of Volvo's total volume. The culprits? Import tariffs, the loss of federal EV tax credits, and a market that's just not ready for compact electric vehicles at the price Volvo needed to charge. The EX30 will stick around in Canada and Mexico, but U.S. production wraps up this summer. And Audi's trying something new, and American dealers are getting first dibs. Audi's largest crossover ever, the Q9, will launch in the U.S. before anywhere else. That's a first for the German luxury brand. CEO Gernot Dollner says they listened to what American customers wanted this time: a spacious interior with 6 captain's chairs that works as a chauffeured vehicle. The timing's strategic. The Q9 arrives later this year, just as Audi phases out the A8 sedan. It's also a lifeline for dealers watching sales drop 16% last year. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Automotive News Tech and Innovation reporter Molly Boygon is at NVIDIA GTC 2026 in San Jose this week. That's where she got a chance to speak with NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang about the company's automotive business. Right now, automotive represents just 1% of NVIDIA's revenue, but Huang says he's perfectly fine with that because he believes autonomous driving is already a solved problem. Here's that exchange.
Hi, Jensen. This is Molly Boygon from Automotive News. Thanks for taking my question. NVIDIA's automotive business is about 1% of the company's total revenue. What challenge do you think is most important in determining if and when automotive becomes material to NVIDIA's financial results?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And that question is particularly dear to me because, as you know, NVIDIA's CUDA business used to be 0% of our business. And it was 90% of our cost. And any sane person would have given up on that. But none of you would be in this room right now. And so when we first introduced the programmable shader in 25 years ago, nobody knew how to use it. Nobody wanted to pay for it. No benchmarking site thought it was a good idea. If we would have given up on that, programmable shading wouldn't have achieved this. 8 years ago, when I announced RTX ray tracing, everybody fooled it. Everybody said ray tracing, foo bar. If we didn't have RTX today, doing full scene path tracing, computer graphics wouldn't be what it is today. So it turns out almost everything that we did in the beginning cost a lot of money and it generated nothing. And even a lot of bad will. And so you have to believe in what you believe in and, decide whether you want to pursue it or not. 10 years ago, I started to work on autonomous vehicles. The team was one person, me and this one person. And we started that journey to understand what are the technical problems of autonomous driving. We now have a few thousand people working on our ABT. You say that it's 1%. However, remember, NVIDIA's autonomous vehicle business includes 3 computers. There's the training system, the synthetic data generation and simulation system, the onboard systems, and the AV system. The AV system is the only part that we say is part of the autonomous vehicle business directly. But the fact of the matter is, because we focused in this area, the total business is much larger than people think. Remember, Tesla buys NVIDIA systems for training. And they does weight, so does volume, so does, every single autonomous vehicle company in the world who's working in AV of any kind, trucks, vans, cars, robo-taxi, they're buying one of these 3 computers or all of these 3 computers from us. And so that it's quite large. It's quite large. But it doesn't change the fact that even if it was 0, I would continue to pursue it. Now, it leads me to why am I so convinced it's going to happen? Because I fully believe autonomous vehicle is a solved problem. It took us 10 years to get here. It's definitely a solved problem. The rest of this is engineering refinement. In 10 years, someday, 1 trillion miles per day will be 100% or largely autonomous. 1 trillion miles per day just today. It's only limited because driving is limited by butts on seats. If we were not limited by butts on seats, the number of miles driven in the world will definitely go up. And if, let's say, it's 2 trillion miles a day, a year, pick your favorite number for dollars per mile. It is a multi-trillion-dollar business. And so most multi-trillion-dollar businesses started at 0 at some point. And so I'm perfectly fine it being 0. I still believe what I believe.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang spoke with our own Molly Boygan at NVIDIA GTC in San Jose. During another part of the roundtable, Huang gave a shout out to Automotive News' Centennial Coffee Table book.
There's actually a chapter of being in that book. I just want to tell you how proud I am. I am in the automotive industry. Henry Ford was in there. I'm in there.
You can read all of our coverage from NVIDIA GTC at autonews.com. Coming up, a look at why Nissan may have gotten the last laugh in its failed merger with Honda. That's next on Daily Drive.
Are you a dealer creating a workplace culture your employees are proud to be part of? Applications are now open for the 2026 Automotive News Best Dealerships to Work For program. This isn't just an award, it's a chance to get real insight into what's working at your dealership and where you can improve. And we've expanded the categories this year, recognizing everything from technician experience and leadership development to AI enablement and employee retention. The registration deadline is April 17th. Find out more and apply at autonews.com.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. When Honda and Nissan's merger talks collapsed last year, Honda's CEO publicly lectured Nissan about moving too slow and not making bold enough decisions. Fast forward to today, and the tables have turned. Honda just posted its first net loss in corporate history after canceling multiple EV models. Meanwhile, Nissan, under new CEO Ivan Espinosa, is cutting costs aggressively and starting to stabilize. Automotive News Asia editor Hans Greimel has a column on autonews.com arguing that Nissan dodged a bullet and may have gotten the last laugh after all. Our own Jake Neer reached Hans at his home office in Tokyo.
Hans, always great to have you here on Daily Drive. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jake. Good to be here.
Really fascinating column here. And, in retrospect, there's a lot to learn, I think, from what happened with this. First, set the scene for us, Hans. At one point, Honda was essentially lecturing Nissan about needing to be more quick and decisive. Walk us through this dramatic reversal. Like, how did we get here?
Well, if we go back to December of 2024, there was a big surprise announcement that all of a sudden Nissan and Honda were going to have a merger, not just a cooperation, which they had been working on before, cooperating on projects here and there, but actually have a full-on merger. And they were going to be merging, combining their companies in kind of a quasi merger of equals this year, 2026. That was the timeline. And as we lapsed then into 2025, they were supposed to hammer out the details and make arrangements about where they were going to integrate and how they were going to create a committee to move ahead, and then maybe even bring in Mitsubishi to join into a three-way tie-up that would have created the world's number three auto group at the time, and with volume over 8 million vehicles a year. So it was quite a substantial merger that they were envisioning. Then, as they got into early 2025, it seemed like Honda was getting some cold feet. They looked under the hood at Nissan, saw that Nissan was really struggling with a lot of problems. This was under former Nissan CEO Makoto Uchida. And, they were struggling with losses, with a bad balance sheet, cash flow problems, and of course, sliding sales. And Honda thought, well, you know what? We're quite stronger than that. If we're going to actually tie up with you, we want to do it our way. We want to have full control and a full merger, make Nissan essentially a division of Honda Motor Company. And that created a lot of friction, which ultimately tore apart the whole plans for a merger. So they blew up the plans for the merger. And at that point, Honda CEO Mibe-san was basically lecturing the counterparts over at Nissan, saying, you're moving too slow, you're not being bold enough, you're not making the hard decisions that you really need to make to turn your company around. And Nissan said, no, thank you, we're not in it for the merger. And they went their separate ways. Shortly thereafter, Nissan has a new CEO that did make the hard decisions, is putting Nissan through a kind of a tough love revival plan. Then meanwhile, Honda has kind of gone its own separate way. It's been a victim of kind of an over ambition or over optimism in the EV trend, which of course has since gone kind of flip-flopped on them because of the loss of incentives. And now it's Honda that's in the world of hurt, just as Nissan seems to be finding its feet. So it's a little bit of a reversal of fortunes there. Now it's Nissan that's on the upswing, or at least has bottomed out, and it's Honda that seems to be in free fall.
And as we've been talking about on the show, Honda recently canceling 3 EV models, and then it looks like the Prologue is also going to end after this run. In hindsight, were there warning signs, do you think, that Honda's all-in approach was too aggressive on EVs? And why did Honda's competitors hedge their bets instead?
Well, I think there were a couple maybe warning signs. Honda was unique among the Japanese automakers in going all in on EVs, basically. It wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't like flipping a switch and switching to EVs tomorrow, but it was the only Japanese automaker that fully committed to phasing out internal combustion by 2040. So it was rather radical, fast timeline for that. And that's a big change for a company that is one of the biggest, the world's biggest makers of internal combustion engines, because you have to remember it not only has an automotive division, but it also makes, it's one of the world's biggest makers of motorcycles. And it also has a huge power plant maker that makes things like lawnmowers and generators and all kinds of little self-contained combustion engines. So that would have been a major revolution, I suppose, for Honda to remake itself in that image. And I think that was maybe a little bit too drastic for a company of its size, of its medium size, of its limited resources. The rest of the Japanese companies took a more measured approach, partly because they knew that their home market of Japan was very slow in going to EVs. So I think maybe one of the warning signs that we could have seen early on was that Honda was losing sight of its home market, which is very slow to adapt to these EVs, and it didn't have that support of the home market base behind it.
Let's talk a little bit about the leadership of both of these companies. As you mentioned, Nissan has a new CEO. We'll talk about Ivan Espinosa in a second. But when it comes to Mibe, he says he is forfeiting 30% of his pay at Honda for 3 months over this. You note it's up to investors and the board to decide if that's a sufficient response or recompense, I guess you could say. But based on what you're hearing in Japan, is there appetite for bigger leadership changes at Honda?
Well, that's a good question. I hear from analysts and the investor community here and people from the outside looking in that they're not happy with the direction that Mibe has led the company. First, his overaggression in dealing with Nissan kind of blew up that deal. Now he's led Honda into its first net loss in its corporate history, writing down billions and billions of dollars of wasted money on this bad bet on EVs. So it's clear that he kind of overstepped his bounds and led Honda into a pitfall here. That said, he's still on the agenda for this year's shareholder meeting to be reelected as the president this year in June at the annual shareholding meeting. So, we've got that going for him. But you never know. He's been in office for 5 years or so. And that's about the normal turnover period for a CEO in Japan, 6 years. So he could be coming up for a rotation.
Well, let's talk about Ivan Espinosa, as I mentioned. And, he's been CEO at Nissan for less than a year now. But in that time, you mentioned that he's got a pretty bold turnaround plan here. And just in a few months, he's announced exits from 7 plants, 20,000 job cuts, $500 billion in cost reductions. What's your assessment at this point of whether this turnaround plan is looking like it's on track, whether it has legs, or is this just sort of basic crisis management?
Well, he's doing a good job in terms of cutting the costs, in terms of right-sizing the company, as they say it. He's really slashing the global production footprint, bringing the costs in line with its capacity, basically. So that is a must-do. The biggest challenge he'll have is after all this cuts is trying to get the sales going in the right direction, because sales are still falling and he needs new product, attractive new product to kind of turn that around. If he can't get the revenue going and sales going in the upward direction again, then all the cutting in the world is not going to help him right this ship. And that's the biggest challenge that he faces going ahead.
So going back to the original conceit that really Nissan kind of has the last laugh here, even after being lectured by Honda and so forth. Do you think that Honda could have avoided some of its troubles if it had not sort of blown up these talks with Nissan? Do you think that a merger may have benefited Honda in some way more than it realized at the time?
Well, it's hard to see what the future of these companies could have been if they emerged. I tend to see that the merger of the two companies would have just compounded their own headaches, maybe. As not clear that putting two weak companies together would have created a strong company rather than just compounded their own problems. It's probably better that each of them sorts through their own headaches and their own weaknesses first, put themselves on the track, and then seeks out partners again from a position of strength. That's at least Nissan's point of view under Espinosa. He is open to having other partners and still on the track for creating these partnerships going forward, knowing that he doesn't have the capacity alone in Nissan to compete in this new world that we're in. But he also says that Nissan has to fix its own problems to pretty itself up in order to find a good partner from a position of strength. So that, I think, is the prudent approach here that Nissan is trying to take.
With that in mind, when this story was sort of the daily talker, about a year ago, it felt like there were a lot of conversations about broader industry consolidation. That's a topic that had a lot of steam for a while, and now it seems like we're not talking so much about it. Is there a lesson to learn about that idea that the industry can consolidate and in order to better compete with China and do better with technology, things like that. What should we take out of this sort of microcosm about the broader issue?
Well, that's a good observation because, for a long time, scale was the key to success, right? And we saw companies combining and mergers as the kind of the panacea, right? As Stellantis is the classic example of that, where you just bolt a bunch of companies together, build a huge constellation. Literally, the Stellantis was the idea there. There's a constellation of stars of all these different brands. But in reality, it became much more complicated. It adds a lot of complication to management, to brand management, to technology management, and realizing the true benefits of that kind of economy of scale is much more difficult than you might think it would be. At the same time, I think the new realization in the industry is that instead of combining automakers, it might make better sense to combine an automaker with some tech company from outside of the field to bring in some kind of expertise that the automaker doesn't have itself, to kind of leapfrog ahead in terms of technology, if not in terms of scale. So instead of combining like a Nissan with a Honda, combine a Nissan with a tech company. It could be a AI company. It could be autonomous driving company. It could be a chip making company. It could be a collection of different companies in different fields. But the idea is to spread outside of the auto industry and bring in expertise to leapfrog ahead that way.
Really fascinating column. It's called "In Failed Nissan Honda Merger, Nissan Has the Last Laugh," written by my colleague, Hans Greimel. Hans, really appreciate you taking the time from Tokyo to talk with me today. Have a great one, and thanks for joining us.
You bet, Jake. Thank you.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to our own Molly Boygan, Urbash Kakaria, and Jack Walsworth for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on manufacturing, gas prices and EV demand, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with a programmer about how he used an AI agent to negotiate with dealerships and saved $4,200 on a new Hyundai Palisade, all without stepping foot in a showroom until pickup.
It's certainly 100 times easier than it was 3 years ago. Maybe 1,000 times easier than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailyDrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.